Welcome back to another episode of the Anatomy of the Trade. Today we're going to discuss the Bitcoin. It's been a very interesting weekend with the shakeout on the daily chart. So let's start with the analysis of this bar. Franz, what do you see on this bar?
Come on, a little analoging here. What is probably the best representation previously to this bar? And I would go back to February the 23rd. And I would look at that and I would go with my Wyckoff principle of effort versus result. And what I'm seeing is that we'll call that bar on the 23rd, number one. On number one, I'm seeing more effort and actually I'm seeing less effort and I'm seeing more downside result. Certainly the close isn't as good. I think the spread is wider. I think we see a lot more result for that amount of selling pressure than if we go to number two. We see more supply, more attempt to push the price down, and yet what is the result of that? A less spread, a narrower spread, a better close. Looks like it's above 1/2 of the bar, where in the previous bar it's below 1/2 or right at 1/2. Certainly, all of these signs that you tell us to look for, that you teach us in WTC1 and WTC2 are showing that bar number two is one of those looks bearish, acts bullish bars. So that's the first and most obvious thing on here that jumps off the page at me.
Yeah, I think it's a really great observation. First of all, we have definitely analogs here that we could use. So this looks similar. You could also look into this bar as well. You could look into this bar as well. And they all have volume characteristics and spread characteristics, where we have the expansion of the downward spread, expansion of the volume signature as a volume spike. So we know that there is quite a lot of supply in there, but also there is an increase in demand. So it's the increase of the demand that produces the question of, is this a sufficient demand for us not just to stop the price from moving further down, but also absorb it at such point that the trading range that follows this bar, would take a specific shape. So what do I mean by that? If we would compare, let's say, bar number two to bar number zero, I think it's a very fair comparison, right? I think maybe zero has a little bit more of the spread here, just visualizing this. But the close is definitely, somewhat close. Bar number zero is slightly better close, is slightly better effort because there is less effort to push down. And you kind of could see when the close is so high, that suggests that demand is of good quality right here at this spot. And right away after the test, which is here, we're seeing an attempt to go up, and we actually overcome it, and there is one close above the high of this bar. Doesn't happen in case number one. So we have a test, and then we have continuation to the downside. So why is that? That's a very interesting question. Well, I think it's just because there is more supply at one than supply at zero. And that's why the test has this kind of like a low, but still built-in bullish character, where the spread is diminishing and then supply is diminishing as well. In a way, case number two maybe has some similarities to case number one in terms of how much supply comes in comparison to case number zero. So therefore, I would not be surprised if we would kind of drift as we've drifted here, and maybe even create a lower low. I mean, we need to be open to kind of like all possibilities for bullish or bearish scenario. So when we observe in the chart, we're trying to figure out, what is the strength of the supply that came in? What is the strength of the demand that came in? What is demand capable at this point? So kind of interesting, it's going to be interesting to observe what's going to happen. Okay, well, let's discuss this from a different point of view. So, and I don't have the data here that, a long-term data. So let's just use this point right here. If you go into the history of Bitcoin, usually majority of the big secular moves, like the ones that ended in 2017, and I'm sorry, I apologize, I don't have the chart extended, this is futures, they end in some kind of hypodermic action. And so far, we don't have that. We have actually a structure. So we need to have, some kind of, very distinct climactic run, which then would end with negation of that climactic run, some kind of inability to retest the high, and then continuation to the downside. That's what we've had in 2017. So I'm trying to use 2019, talking about the structure in 2017. We don't have it here. So then the question becomes, are we at the end of this secular move or not? And it seems like there are quite a few scenarios here that could potentially happen if this is not the end. Scenario number one, we just kind of recovering and going up. Scenario number two, we're consolidating here more and then we recover. Scenario number three, we are still contained within the structure of the previous trading range, meaning that we might go down to the support, we checked it before the resistance and then recover. So that's number three. And then scenario number four, more pronounced move to the downside into phase C, and then recovery from there. There are instances when, each of the scenario could happen. So for instance, scenario number four could have, I could show you an example of that. For instance, right here, this is trade desk. So let me just quickly show you exactly where it happens. So look how we are, let me increase this. Apologies, it just came to me as a thought just now.
Those are the best kind.
Yeah. So look at this trading range. Three very distinct phases, or rather segments, in this trading range. A stop in action, buy in climax, and then we go into some kind of consolidation. Then we are getting out of this formation and we're spending our phase B in this upthrust action for quite some time. So that tells you about the strength of the structure, and that tells you that institutions are unwilling to depart from this position until some of them are actually given up and capitulate on news. But that news does not produce a big result. So a result is actually diminishing relative to the support. And then we go into another formation. So that's our scenario actually number four, which is still a reaccumulation scenario. So let's kind of identify this on Bitcoin. I'm talking about this formation right here. Could we be showing a lot of strength here? And then if you are bearish, you should be thinking about this scenario as, a break to the downside, break, consolidation, and then continuation to the upside, and this is phase C. So that's probably the most bearish view that I have right now on Bitcoin. And even with that, I'm not quite sure if that's exactly what's going to happen. The reason why is because this is a pretty strong momentum move up. I mean,
I would say.
yeah, where else have you seen something like this? I mean, I'm still my mind is just going crazy when I look at cryptos and specifically Bitcoin, because of such a high momentum signature, there is always going to be attempts to continuation to the upside. I am still thinking about 100,000 um, as a target for this year to happen, for this year to be hit. Yes, we could have reactions. Yes, we could have the corrections, but you know, not necessarily that we are done with this uptrend. Franz, what other thoughts do you have on the daily chart?
Well, look at the kind of character of each of these since the initial liftoff. There have been three kind of separate zones of consolidation, and all of them, well, at least the first one and the one that we're in right now, have a definite upward tilt to them. And to me, that speaks bullish, because we're making, throughout this consolidation, we're making higher highs, pretty much making higher lows as well. And, you know, underlying that, behind that kind of behavior, it seems like we've still got, you know, the buyers are in control. Looking at this last, there's a lot of volume in this last reaction, and yet where has it actually taken us, even within this upsloping trading range? Other than that one big demand tail on the first sell-off, we're actually holding, which might even be, you know, you might view that, well, I guess you wouldn't really view it as a spring because it didn't recover that much, but attempting to undercut the second area there with no real ability. And even with all of this selling, the supply, we haven't been able to even come back down to that level at this point in the reaction anyway. So to me, that just speaks to strength rather than, you know,
Yeah,
underlying weakness in this pattern.
and maybe we should definitely, and I mean, like, we should definitely acknowledge that there is a little bit of the diminished demand character here, right? So we see in the character of the rally as well, that the spread is diminishing, demand is diminishing. So of course we are going to have a reaction, and we're trying to understand to which degree this reaction is going to unfold. I think, you know, also looking at the way how any asset, and specifically Bitcoin, is approaching this area, we should also remember specific bars that are going to be very much important bars. So for instance, this is a breakout bar, so we're going to retest it later on in a more profound way, right? So this is a breakout bar, was not retested at all. So this test suggests strength. Again, strength, again, strength, and then we have retest. Strength, retest, the test is so high, strength, the test is so high again. We retested here, and Franz, please note how this test actually undercuts this bar, right? So this is
Right.
suggestive that supply now for the first time, you know, has a more influence on the price action. So this means that we probably have just one more push up, especially if this is climactic push. I would be thinking that we are probably done, at least for the time being. And that's exactly what happens. Then what is the next bar, Franz, that you would say like it's the most important bar, like the breakout bar?
Well, again, it's that breakout. What is it, around February the 10th or 12th or somewhere in there?
Yeah.
That one, that big significant bar. And look, yeah, look at that. We have made one test barely into well, we came down, the test itself, the tail came down probably into around a half, but look at the close. And then what else has even attempted to test this level? I mean, it just looks bullish to me.
Yeah, and I mean, we could have multiple tests. So, for instance, this bar was tested once, twice, three times. So that's why I'm saying that, you know, we're basically here. We're basically in this area. We're just consolidating. So everybody is just the sentiment of every trader that I talk to who trades Bitcoin or cryptos is such that there is a fear that Bitcoin is not going to behave the same way as it was behaving before. I think people were, in a way, conditioned by the price action to think in a specific way. And I think for a good trader, you have to step out of that mentality. You have to figure out the alternative scenarios that are not necessarily going to be a doom type of scenarios, but the ones that will involve a temporary weakness, a temporary reaction in the construct of a much, much larger trend, and then continuation to the upside. So we might have scenarios that where the price goes up, where the price consolidates, where the price goes down and retest this bar again, and then a recovery from there. And that should not take you out of your position if you're a long-term investor, especially if you started loading up early on. I think it's majority of kind of like, negative sentiment comes from leveraged traders that on this bar had to give up their positions because they were leveraged into the weakness of this rally. And that's probably what's going on. Franz, okay, so any last thoughts on the daily time frame, and then we'll go on the intraday.
Well, one last thought, Roman, and that's sort of the pattern that you and Bruce pointed out Wednesday in the weekly discussion. Each of these kind of volume spikes to the downside, where supply comes in, has some sort of a test, a recovery, and then a little bit more testing. And right now we're sort of in the, you can see that there's the initial sell-off, then there's a bit of a recovery, and then there's another sort of a test that comes into play. And it doesn't look to me like that second test, if that is going to analog out and we're going to see that same behavior again, it doesn't look like that's happened yet. So that's one of the possibilities that you pointed out, which is sort of a sideways, little bit of maybe a little bit more down, a little bit more sideways trading range. And by the way, I don't trade Bitcoin, so I'm just strictly looking at what the chart's telling me. And by no means is this any kind of a investment recommendation. It's just taking what I've learned about the whole Wyckoff methodology and applying it to what this chart's saying to me. So.
Yeah. One last thought also. So a lot of you were talking about the shortening of the thrust, and this is a very important concept. And I mean, I don't know. Maybe we will have this kind of like a low here. That's a possible scenario. But what would be the scenario or how it would look like? And you always have to kind of make it judgments based on different scenarios, different looks. How would it look like? And is it even possible to have a shortening of the thrust without a deep reaction and with continuation of that uptrend? So I'm going to show you an example. And again, sorry guys that I'm kind of doing this on the fly here. So here's an example where, and please ignore this right here. This is not a bias game. This was just an example. So look at what's happening here. We are with the in phase, having the first leg down to point number 2, which resembles a little bit of the Bitcoin change of behavior. Point number 3 is an upthrust, as it was in Bitcoin here. So we're seeing strength, which is marginal strength, but very indicative of just the bullish character of the structure, ability of the price to overcome the resistance and stay above there. So somebody's still buying there, not a lot, but still, the price just goes up. Then 3 to 4, a high or low, and then to 5 is another upthrust like we have in Bitcoin. Then 6 has this a little bit of the shakeout type of character. Does not have a lot of volume signature in the in phase, and variation on the volume could be different, and that's why the structure here could be different than in phases. But I want you to have this in your library of charts. The idea that shortening of the thrust, upward thrust, does not necessarily mean 100% that this is a distributional pattern. And I think this is, France, a great example of this kind of like distinction on the shortening of the thrust.
Yeah, I totally agree.
All right. Well, now let's go to let's go back to um, apologies. Yeah, what's going on today?
One of those faces is very very handsome.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Okay, so here's our 4 hour chart. So as with currencies and cryptos, 4 hours uh, is the time frame to look at. And please refer to Alessio's studies on this. He's just become in France, such a great expert on cryptos and Wyckoff, combination. It's just amazing to see his progress.
Yeah.
So let's kind of quickly look at this from the perspective of the 4 hours, right? So specifically, I want to mention again the test. Oh, and I lost my. I think I lost my. Hold on a second. I lost my pen here.
Oh,
Can I do that? Oh
that's
no,
not good.
not good. All right. Well, we'll figure it out. We're just gonna go like visually, and there are not a lot of points that are left here. So look at the February bar here, right? The one that we talked
Breakout.
about. Yeah,
The
breakout
breakout
bar.
bar.
So the first test has happened, then other tests are at the uh, higher lows, and then look at the shakeout itself. It's only one bar on a 4 hour time frame, and then we have a bunch of bars here that are just basically a consolidation that is a testing consolidation. There are lower highs here in this area of the test. So usually lower highs would suggest some kind of weakness. We also have a lower low here relative to the lowest close. So also a point of vulnerability. So short term, we could still potentially be kind of like drifting down a little bit. That's a possibility. The important bar right now on the 4 hour is going to be this bar right here. This is April 21st at 1300 in my time zone. So we need to overcome that. If this is a local spring right here, this bar, then we need to most definitely commit above the last capitulation to the downside. So that's what I would be looking for, a more bullish scenario. And then for a more bearish scenario, I would be thinking about inability to go above the high of this bar and kind of drifting down. And if we drift down enough to the support area, maybe even a breakdown type of bar, and we have to see what kind of demand is going to come in at that point.
Sure, there are probably stops that are going to get triggered and so on
Yeah,
and so
yeah,
forth.
I would imagine so. So let's kind of quickly think about this. If the stops are going to be triggered, so usually this is going to be what um, investors that are giving up on their long-term positions. And it's going to be also leveraged positions that are going to be triggered. And if the long trend is going to be still sustainable, that's going to produce enough liquidity and value for the institutions to come in and to support the price. And I would be thinking that if we drift down and break to the downside, we're going to go into this area right here at around 49,000, like the low of this bar. So 50,000 to maybe like 43,000, something like this, in the vicinity of the previous stop in action. Franz, what other thoughts do you have on the 4 hour?
Well, I think that's pretty much nailed it on the head. I mean, that one threatening bar, and now we're just testing it. And the first area to overcome, you pointed out, the second area is that bar itself. So far we actually have recovered. If you look at the entire bar, including the tail, we have gotten back into at least the
Mm-hmm.
little bit better than a half of it. At that 58,000 level or so. But yeah, I mean, it's got work left to do, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. The lowest close was right here
Mm-hmm.
on this like second bar after the shakeout. So orient yourself towards that bar. So
Mm-hmm.
if we go and we test, that's a good test. If we go and we go below sprint type situation, would the sprint fail, or would the sprint actually, take us up above? Above what?
Mm-hmm.
Above this bar right here, above this high. And we're trying right now to do exactly that, to overcome this high right here. Okay, well, I think with this is it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully that brings you some value and clarification as to how we view Bitcoin at this point. Happy trading, Franz. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ramon. Always a pleasure.